to be blessed by what she has to share with us. And so I'm going to invite her to come and share with us tonight.
Thank you so much. I am incredibly humbled and honored to be here tonight, and I just really am very thankful for all of you. It is really just extraordinarily heartwarming to be able to meet with some of our foster families, be able to just really connect with you right where you're at and in the work that you're doing, because this truly is God's work. So as she said, I'm Debra Rush. I am one of the founders and CEO of Breaking the Chains. I'll go ahead and I don't know if you have the PowerPoint up. That's fine. Okay. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. And so Breaking the Chains, just so you guys know, is a 501c3 charitable organization based right here in the central San Joaquin Valley. And we really are one of the main boots on the ground direct service providers to all individuals and lives impacted by human trafficking. I like to kind of start right there and let you guys know that lives impacted by human trafficking, we have come to find out, goes far beyond the actual victim. It reaches into the families. It reaches into the foster families. One of the things I'll talk about tonight very specifically with you guys is Breaking the Chains has piloted a really phenomenal program that is gaining a lot of speed and gaining a lot of attention from other organizations similar to ours across the nation. And that is our Csec, which is CSEC, foster program. So these are our Csec families. There are foster care families that we partner with who basically say that I would like my home to primarily be used for or prioritized for children who have been impacted by sex trafficking. And in doing that, these families are able to come through us. They get some training about what's happening with human trafficking and a more extended version of what I'm going to talk to you about tonight. So really, really, again, like I said, that's also what makes this really important for me in being here tonight with each and every one of you guys. Really important to note, because I always get this question, and we'll just knock this question out of the way early on, is are you a faith-based program, right? And I'm going to interject a shameless plug into this. My book. I have a book back there called A Cry of the Heart, written by a really extraordinary author based right here in the central San Joaquin Valley, Penelope Childers. The good news about that means it's a great book, right? I didn't write it. I recorded almost 200 hours of my story along with family members, the law enforcement officer who was actively participated in my rescue, our now mayor, former police chief Jerry Dyer, and several others. And we sat down with Penny, and she put this extraordinary book together. So definitely, as I speak tonight and you hear me address some lace in, if you will, my story into some of the things I'm going to talk to you about tonight, just know that you can grab a book tonight, or you can go on Amazon and get your own, okay? Back to the faith-based. Before I answer that question, or should I answer as to why we chose to go charitable and not faith-based, but how at the same time we absolutely operate in a faith-based capacity, it's really important for you to understand a really important component to my story, which is a huge component to so many of the stories that we see at Breaking the Chains. Human trafficking is by far one of the most traumatic events that can occur in a youth's life, especially here domestically. We do have the benefit of being here in America and not having some of the atrocities that we see in some of the third world countries. Say where like guerrilla soldiers come into villages, rape and pillage, and drag children out. But at the same time, we are still seeing that same level of atrocity happening within brothels, back rooms, hotel rooms, and even in some of the most prominent neighborhoods right here in Fresno. Understanding that atrocity goes a lot deeper than just the issue itself. It's understanding the vulnerabilities that are present and the vulnerabilities that become present post-trauma. In 1999, I was taken by a gang member because of a drug debt my mother owed and very violently trafficked. There's two types of traffickers, and we don't have to all night tonight to go through an HT 101, but we basically have what is the more prevalent in 2022 is our Romeo traffickers. These are guys who present themselves in a relationship type status, woo, manipulate, and groom these young kids and young adults into trafficking. And then on the other hand, which is something we've seen very early on when gangs really began to become prevalent in the sex trade, is guerrilla-style traffickers. And these guys usually start off with the same exact tactics, grooming, luring, an individual into that by some means. But within a very short period of time, if not almost immediately, it becomes very violent. I was very vulnerable. I was raised out of Southwest Fresno, kind of in between a lot of different areas there, in a highly impoverished family in largely crime-impacted neighborhoods, primarily out by like Martin Luther King and North, out there in Southwest Fresno. And so the vulnerabilities that I had really extended beyond my own home life. Within my own home life, I had a mother who was drug dependent. I was born addicted to heroin. She was known to be in the sex trade for many, many years before I was ever even conceived. So I had all these cards stacked against me. And again, this is very common to what we were seeing early on in the sex trade and what we knew of the kids who are most impacted by human trafficking, right? There's all these really significant red flags and core vulnerabilities. Fast forward, I ended up taken because of a drug debt that my mother owed. I was lured out and within a few short days taken down to Los Angeles. Almost immediately, the violence began. The very first moment that I began to indicate that this was not something that I wanted to do, that there must have been some sort of misunderstanding, this is not what I'm down here for, it was immediate. Over the next several months, I would go through atrocities that are very hard for me to recant, and I frankly don't even want to talk about it. It was a really great reason for me to write the book and say, good, I can put this on paper and I can send people back that way to hear about it. Ultimately, there was an officer here. He was a rookie police officer from right here in Fresno who was a patrol officer on Parkway Drive who encountered me. He had encountered my mother several times, and my family was kind of known as far as on my mom's side of my family. A couple of her sisters, I had some cousins, unfortunately, were very heavily embedded in the sex trade. So they knew who I was, they knew who my family was, but he hadn't seen me out there very often, and basically my face didn't fit the image of what he's seen on a day-to-day basis. And this forced him to start asking some questions, especially as a new officer. And this one officer did one thing that almost any one of us could do. He simply engaged with me. He didn't just engage and have a conversation. He engaged with me with concern, with intent, with a Christ-fed caring and lovingness that really spoke to my heart. Ultimately, when I would finally find the ability to be able to really leave somewhat successfully, there was only one person I wanted to find, and that was that officer. This is ultimately how I found my way out of that life at that moment. I ended up being able to get back in contact with my family. Again, it's a whole story. I'm telling you, it is really sordid. You got to read the book. I ended up being able to be reconnected with my family, and my family immediately went into action and created what I really think is the very first safe house. I was relocated down to Northern California to live with an aunt who was heavily involved in apostolic church. My grandmother had taken me to church every Sunday of my life. I'm actually raised by my biological father, so that was a huge part of my life, a huge foundation for me. And so I had this belief system. I had this belief system that especially I think 25 years ago, a lot of Christians had, that, there's almost this magical Jesus. And I don't want to offend anybody here because, again, there's only one person who holds the power and all authority in the kingdom, and I know that. My husband's a pastor, and he preaches very prominently on that. But I do think that sometimes we approach him as a magical being rather than the deity that he is, right? As a deity, Christ, we know, is somebody who has a rhyme or reason to what he does. He says that it rains on the just and the unjust alike. This is really hard for a child to understand. This is almost inconceivable for children who have been impacted by violent crime and abuse and some of the worst things that people can imagine on a day-in, day-out basis. This was a magical deity to me. In my mind, and it felt like in the mind of the church, I needed to just come to the altar, fall down before the knees of my Savior, right? They're gonna plead the blood of Jesus over me, and every demon is gonna flee, and I'm gonna magically get back up off this altar, and everything's going to be great. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. I poured out everything I had at that altar, probably cried harder than I've ever cried, felt the presence of God all around me, felt really great in that moment. walked out the doors of that church, and my life exploded. Actually, my life crumbled. I began to experience what I now know as complex compound PTSD as my life quickly fell apart. I started having hallucinations. I had a lot of issues in my life that were resembling that of probably a hardcore drug user. I was having trouble coming out of my house. I wasn't able to take care of my child. I wasn't communicating with other people. I was up all night, sleeping all day. Again, that's a whole trauma story we could get into another time where we talk about some of the physical ramifications of complex compound PTSD. At that time, human trafficking and what was happening wasn't being really talked about, and nobody understood. So the atmosphere around me, the rumors that circled within my own head and with that of my friends and family was that, the apple didn't fall far from the tree. Sometimes a bad dog is just a bad dog. Whispers of drug use and drug abuse was just swirling all around my life. People were pulling themselves away because they didn't know how to help me. I didn't know how to help me. But something even worse happened. That place where I found myself at the altar not only seemed 100 miles away, I began to resent it. Slowly, because this is how trauma impacts us, trauma festers like a sore. And that trauma soon pivoted to hatred. I did not believe in who God was. I hated him. I remember very young, I had seen some pretty incredible, miraculous moments throughout my life, from miraculous healing at the hands of my grandmother, who was Holy Spirit-filled, to people coming to the altar and essentially seeing. I seen as a child, like it taking 6 people to pray and hold one small man down. I knew that God was real. I had felt the fire of the Lord in my life, but I hated him. Because whoever he was, he didn't care about me. Whoever he wasn't there as a child in those lonely nights where I cried myself to sleep. He wasn't there for me in the sand in front of the Storyland Inn as my mother prostituted herself across Motel Drive. He wasn't there for me when that trafficker took out my back 3 molars and did a whole bunch of other really horrific things to me. This is a very common place that we find for a lot of the individuals that we serve that are impacted by human trafficking. These individuals have been through things that most of us can't imagine. So, early on in Breaking the Chains, we were getting ready to file for our 501c3, and it really was an incredible moment because it was going against everything that I thought and that I was taught and that I believed. At this point, when we started Breaking the Chains, I'm back in the church. I like to leave it leave you guys guessing so you'll get the book, how that happened. But I'm like a children's church director. I'm hellfire and brimstone. It would only make sense to be a faith-based organization, right? And everything in me as we got ready to fill out that 501c3 started to cringe. And I really can't articulate it, and those of you who have really felt the Spirit of God move in your life or speak to you in a non-audible voice know what I'm talking about. And I turned to our co-founder and my best friend in this whole world, Tiffany, and I said, we're not supposed to be faith-based. And I love her because I call her my cliff jumper, because that's what makes us such a great partnership, is I feel like she just follows me blindly. I'm serious. So it's like, okay. No, she wasn't that easy, and she just kind of was like, are you sure? Well, let's talk about the pros and cons. And we started going, over our pros and cons, and I kept coming back to one thing. I said, I don't know right now. I just know that we're not supposed to. Long story short, within a few months, God began to reveal his plan as we began to meet with business administrators from across the valley and beyond. And the question we kept coming back to, because I was still stuck in this place of making sure that I was following God's plan for breaking the chains, was this 501c3. So what we ended up doing was we met with a gentleman here in town who began, and he's not a God-fearing man by no means. As a matter of fact, he probably could be an atheist. I haven't asked him, but he sure acts like one. But he's very smart, and he has a very ridiculously awesome legal mind. And I presented my problem to him, and he said, you're fine. And I said, what do you mean we're fine? He said, as long as you stay privately funded. He said, there's not a person in this world, or majority, privately funded, and you read all the fine print, Debra, there's not a person in this world that cannot stop you from practicing your faith. he said, you still gain ownership over that organization. So that's what we did. We realized, okay, so we can still preach Jesus. We are based on a church campus. Let's continue to move forward in this. We still didn't know what God's plan was. My testimony on that is to tell you that we have, since we have opened our doors, helped lead dozens of LGBTQ community members to Christ. We have a gentleman who came out through a Homeland Security operation last year, ready to have a full-on transgender change, reclaim who he is as a man, and is still going through some of these processes. We have had people who call us numerous times and say, look, we're so happy. I heard this rumor that you might be faith-based, but the person I have said absolutely not a faith-based organization. I said, we're not a faith-based organization. I mean, we got some options. We do Bible study at night, but they don't have to attend. We are 100% a charitable organization. And then most recently in the last couple of years where we began to see throughout the pandemic the target that was placed upon the church as organizations were forced to decide how they were going to operate and what they were going to do and what would happen with government funding. It all really began to come together. So we feel like, especially in the midst of what you guys have going on, not just here but within Action Church, that we really make sure that you guys understand that at the end of every day, our heart has always been and always will be to show the love of Jesus Christ to the people that are brought before us, but not to force it down their throat. With that said, as I pivot back to some of the services that we provide, we have a service structure program that I'd like you guys to really be able to focus in on. And good, yes, if we can go, thank you. That is based off one of the most simple models there is. I really feel like if it's not broke, why fix it? And so if you are in any type of social work, medical, or helping service profession, I see some heads shaking, you recognize this, right? Maslow's. And so from this place where we're at, we started developing curriculum and services that really addressed on this model the needs of all of the individuals that we serve. And just so you know, we serve clients of all ages. Our youngest client has been 11 years old, up to about 67, I think, is what we were looking at not too long ago, with the average age of the clients that we serve are between 12 and 25 years old. And what we do is everything that we do at Breaking the Chains is based on this model. So we start with their most basic needs, which is food, water, shelter, health, right? So we make sure that all of our environments are equipped with warm food, clothing, shower, bath, and some of the most basic needs. We understand that at the end of the day, you can't serve a client if they have a headache, right? I don't know about you, but if I'm feeling really ucky that day, I don't want to have a conversation with anybody, let alone something that's really in depth. And then we, of course, make sure that that place is safe, calm, and protected. But I think one of the most biggest interjection points, and this is where I pivot back to you guys, and the focus, right, on what I think is really important for you guys to take home tonight is that relationship. I think the crux of what has made Breaking the Chains and a lot of our clients so ultimately successful is the relationship that is formed with the community. The relationship that we are able to form within the Csec families and the foster families that serve our children. One of the things very early on that I've been a huge, I don't want to say a proponent, or I should say I've been hugely against, but I know it's kind of necessary, is group homes. If you run a group home here, I'm sorry. And it's not because I don't think that group homes are great, and I don't think that they are well-intentioned, but it's one of the things that I understand, and if you don't know, I'm also a trauma professional. I'm kind of a mind geek. A lot of my certifications and what I do is in understanding how the brain wires and fires and how trauma impacts not just individuals impacted by human trafficking, but how it impacts us as humans in general, specifically children. And one of the things that we know during adolescence is this is one of the core identity building times for a child, right? It's right there between 12 and 25 years old, right before that frontal lobe engages. This is where they are really starting to understand relationship. They are starting to really project all the things that have been built up in childhood and begin to really be able to act that out. As foster parents, you provide a critical interception point that sometimes group homes just really cannot build from, right? Group homes, as well-intentioned as they are, it still operates more like a facility. There's still someone clocking in and off shift, so you may have, Susan in the morning who's well involved and well encapsulated the kid, and then you have Tara who comes at the end of the day who's just playing on Facebook and just trying to be like, hey, did you get the shower? Get the shower, right? And there's not this model of relationship that is consistently present. So one of the things that we did in understanding that is, again, it's necessary because not all kids can be in foster placement, is trying to focus on that nucleus family. And understanding that simple things like a child sitting at the table and being asked how their day was, what are your plans for tomorrow, talking about how to make spaghetti, or just talking about the program that's on TV, or explaining some of the horrific things that are happening on the news is so important to relationship. We also see that within human trafficking and our kids that are impacted, 8 out of 10 of them are not out there out of economic desperation or addiction. As a matter of fact, it's the exact opposite. They're giving their money to these traffickers. They're there out of a desperation for relationship. They're there because even if it costs them their dignity, their identity, just to have someone who will, even if it's in the worst way, make eye contact and acknowledge who I am and make me on some level feel like I am important and contributing to their life, that means the whole world. So we work with our foster families to understand that. We work with them to understand how much more critically important it is. And again, I start there as a blanket for all foster families, or any child that you have that comes in, is again, if a child is in foster care, it's pretty much 99.9, there is a breakdown in relationship, correct? They're missing parents, they're missing siblings, these type of things. As we move up into talking about kids that are impacted by human trafficking, we start seeing a much more reduced, not that it's not present in all of them, because all of these factors are present in all the kids that we see, in belonging and self-esteem. In that belonging and self-esteem model, what we've seen, and for this, and I'll talk about prevention as well, I won't forget that, I promise you. But with belonging and self-esteem, these are kids who have been involved in the sex trade. So on top of all of the weight that you see on an average foster care child of feelings of abandonment, feelings of being pushed away, not good enough, all the false belief systems that are already in place, now they have been very violently and repeatedly exposed to the most horrific trauma that an individual can endure, and that's human trafficking. The level of self-esteem that these kids have is usually covered over with a lot of bravado or a lot of people-pleasing. It's one of the two. They either end up being that child within your home that is so passive and so much in a place where they aim to please that they continuously put themselves in really inappropriate situations. We're going to talk about in a minute about some of the behaviors that we see that are so much greatly different than what we see with other foster care kids, specifically how it impacts Csec kids. And then the other side of that is some of our kids, quite frankly, are some of the most difficult to deal with because they build an exterior, an outer core that is so hard and so protected that they feel like they're attacking anyone and everyone, and they could really care less about anybody and what anybody's trying to do for them. This is them just essentially pushing anyone and everyone away. Finally, whenever we have them placed in these foster homes, this is an incredible opportunity for the favorite part, I love Maslow's, is that self-actualization. Self-actualization is really the, revelation of motivation, right? It's the revelation of I have a purpose. Your purpose this morning could have simply been that you had to, I don't know, volunteer here tonight, right? Come here to this. And maybe that's what motivated you through today. Sometimes we're only motivated to the next hour to watch our show. Some of the greatest motivations come, though, from relationship, right? From understanding that there is a place for us in this world. There is a place for us in today, and there is a place for us in this moment. As foster families, you provide that. Social workers, us as case managers, we work our hardest to make sure that all the T's are crossed, all the I's are dotted, that placement is secure, that they are receiving all of the different support systems they need, that they are eligible for AB 12, that their trafficker is prosecuted and put away, that they understand their rights and nobody's re-exploiting them. But we can't, just like we hear with officers, do everything. We do our best to build relationship, build goals, goal charts, and safety planning. But the strongest level of motivation that we have seen has come from the families that they are with each and every day at home. I have a couple stories that I'd like to share with you before we jump into red flags. And I know, it's our service, right? I'm going to stop right there with that one. That's going to get me all off track, Lana. But is Karina, and we just shared these, so I'll share them with you, is Karina and Amelia. Karina and Amelia really are just shining examples of success stories within our Csec families. I'm really big, not that I doubt what's going to happen with our clients or how well they're going to do, but I really like to see the end result, right? Or maybe a more long-term result. So it was almost 2 years ago when Breaking the Chains officially launched our juvenile justice program. Up until then, we were primarily known for serving adults. Behind the scenes, and unbeknownst to all the speaking we did, we had some kids that we were working with, the things that we were doing, and developing a lot of the stuff that I just talked to you about, and understanding more about childhood development, and really trying to serve this precious population, and trying to figure out what we were going to do if we weren't going to open a group home, because we were dead set against that. I'm like, we're not going to just add more to the chaos. And so we were able to officially launch this program. Within a couple of months of that launch, which something we're also very commonly known for, is we did a big operation with Homeland Security. Something we've been doing for a long time with FBI, local law enforcement, usually, well, pretty much over the last 6 years, all your major human trafficking operations throughout the Central Valley, Breaking the Chains is on the back end of those, working as advocates. This was much more exciting for us in this first operation because we didn't know what was going to happen, but we were really, really helping Homeland Security to focus on minors, right? We were ready. We didn't know what we were going to get. And in through the doors came one of the most extraordinary stories that I have seen at Breaking the Chains, definitely, especially within our minor community, and that's Karina. If you've been on our website, if you're on our mailing list, then you've already heard the story. But just to share with you, Karina was only 15 years old whenever, and obviously that's not her name. We protect the identities of all of our clients. But she was only 15 years old whenever she received a message in the middle of the night. She was really excited, and this is the perfect time for this story because all of our kids just went back to school because it was only a couple weeks before school started. And she got a message from a graduated senior who was in her remedial math class the year before. Now, this just wasn't any senior. This was like that guy. You know what I'm talking about? Like, usually have about 15 of that guy. She's, I could imagine 15-year-old self. She's like, is this who's really texting me, right? Or messaging her on social media? And, he sends her a little chatty message and basically says, hey, how you doing? Sucks. I'm sad I won't be at school this year. And once she catches her breath to really be like, oh, my gosh. They had talked a few times. They had connected. She had got to sit with him here and there, in passing. But I can't believe he's really messaging me. She messages back. Throughout the rest of the night, it's a very normal conversation. As a matter of fact, over the next few weeks, it's pretty normal, very good, seemed to be very healthy conversations. They talked very regularly. He seemed to be very inquisitive about what was happening at school, really emphasizing on how much he missed school and what was happening. Throughout these conversations, he began interjecting things about another girl. There was another girl who was just starting her senior year. She was coming back in through her senior year. She had a brand new car, brand new clothes, and in Karina's mind, she seemed like a brand new person. Prior to that, she had had a lot of trouble in her life. She was from the same neighborhood, only a street away from where Karina was raised, and so Karina knew about a lot of the problems that this older girl had in her life. And so he kept pointing to just how awesome this girl was and just how much he respected her and some of the things that she was doing. Some of the things that she was doing that they began having conversations back and forth about, which had pretty much been the rampant rumors over the summer, was doing a thing called sugaring. Unfortunately, sugaring is seen as somewhat legal in the state of California for adults. It's basically escorting. So this is where adult females will join an escort site and kind of have the girlfriend experience with paying other adults. So this had been sprinkled in the conversation. A little bit more time goes by, a month or so, and then all of a sudden, this senior comes up with a crisis. She has just become head over heels, just infatuated with him. They have already been intimate. They've already started to build a relationship. Although they got to keep it secret, she's just really excited about it. And he lets her know that he was in an unfortunate situation. He just didn't know what to do. Him and his mother lived in an apartment. Mom was very poor and single, again, his story. And mom was sick, and mom couldn't take care of herself, had lost her job, and so he was going to have to move out of state. There was an opportunity for him out of state. He was going to be able to make some money working with a friend of his and send it back because he had to take care of his mom. This was more than Karina can handle. Karina absolutely just couldn't deal with this in this moment. She could not be without relationship. See, the thing that you don't understand about Karina is also from Southwest Fresno. Karina had been a part of the foster care system for most of her life and had only been reunited with a very elderly grandmother within like 6 months prior to this conversation. She had never had anybody that had been really connected, she had been connected with. As a matter of fact, most of the people in her life she had felt had abandoned her, and this was about to happen again. Her mind began to race. She goes back to all the stories he had told her about the other girl at school and all the things that she was doing, and she came up with an idea. She said, well, what do you think about me doing what so-and-so did? He tells her, oh, man, I appreciate that you would do that, but you're not even 18. That's not going to work. You have to be 18. You have to have a license. That's like a legitimate job. It's not a legitimate job. But you couldn't do that. But if you really want to help me, I have another idea. And Karina's introduced to the life of the child sex trade. Very shortly into that, she starts understanding that this is not a place that she wants to be. It only takes a very short period of time before his whole attitude changes. She makes suggestions about ways that she can get out, which only seems to make him angrier. Ultimately, several months into this now very tumultuous life that she's living, where she is just embarrassed, she doesn't know how to get out, she's completely confused because at the same time, even despite all of this, she still wants this relationship. She comes face to face with breaking the chains. She was targeted in an online ad very intentionally and brought to us. It's incredible because I really feel like this story poses that moment of change that each of you guys present in a kid's life, that moment that I got to have, where I just watched the devastation that was all over her just crack open into hope. And that's what we talk about. Those are her words. If you read our story, those were her words in the end of it, not ours. As we begin to tell her about a new life and relationship and an opportunity that was available to her. Thankfully, she ended up taking us up on that offer, and we brought her in. It took us about a week of different visitations that we were having with her and encounters with her to begin to convince her to self-admit into the DSS program and to becoming a foster child. We ended up being able to meet with a biological dad who was out of his mind on drugs, who could care less what was happening, but did care about it. Not care less about it. I should take that back. He cared about his daughter, but could care less what was happening in his own life and grandmother. And she was signed into the foster care program. Through this, because of the partnerships that we have with a foster family, she was reunited with a really great family just outside of Fresno, and her life began. This last year, she graduated with extraordinary. I mean, she had really great grades whenever she graduated in June. She's now looking at going into Fresno State. She's a part of the AB 12 program and a huge proponent for pulling other girls out of that lifestyle. Obviously, that's not something we're engaging in now. We're only a year and a half into this, so we want her to get a little bit further down her healing path, but it's an extraordinary story. We have stories like this that just span way past Karina into several other kids. Right now, we can tell you that 100%, which we know this won't stay like this, but as of tonight, 100% of the 9 children that we have placed over the last year into a Csec family continue to be successful. That's extraordinary numbers. They are not AWOLing. They are not falling back into negative behaviors. There's some bumps in the road. We had one that had to be replaced and come back, but again, success continues to bloom. So, some red flags. Some things that we noticed over this last year and having this experience, and it's something we continue to build on. We're continuing to have think tanks and talk with families and talk about some of the things they're experiencing. So some of the things that we look for with Csec placement is we ask that those priority families do not have other children within a vulnerable age group present within their home. The unfortunate part about kids who have been impacted by sex trafficking is children who may be in a prevention stage are much more susceptible to being lured out. This isn't something that's intentional, but hurt people hurt people. It really just does work like that. And again, at a development age where kids are so greatly impacted by peer pressure, what their peers think, and what's going on with the people around them, we've seen that that can just be a recipe for disaster. So we also make sure that if they have a child that they are under the age of 10 or above the age of 18. Some of the other, and there's not a whole lot of difference. There's about 5 core differences, but not that we really want people to know about whenever they do choose to become a Csec foster family. But not a whole lot. I mean, most of the issues that we have are probably some of the issues that you guys face each and every day. Another issue that we have with some of our kids that are Csec, or I would say an issue, maybe that's not the right word. Some of the things we want to prepare families for is social media, right? And again, we'll talk a little bit more about this in a second about prevention as well. But really, especially within our Csec population, is making sure that you have things like BARC apps and that you are staying in close communication with our technology team, with our tech support, and with social workers to understand some of the different platforms are present and some of the different things that you may need to watch for within that population. Another huge issue that we have is depression. Watching for suicidal ideations and things like that. What we've noticed is that with some of our Csec population, these kids basically tend to almost get worse at first before they get better. Does that make sense? It's almost like they come in, and if in those first couple weeks, there's an expectation that you're not going to accept them. There's also a false belief and an expectation because of that shame and guilt that we were talking about that they don't belong there. So we really find that those first couple weeks are a really big time for a lot of shoulder rubbing, a lot of really trying to work one-on-one with counselors and families to help the child connect. But the great part about that is, again, 9 out of 9, once they make that connection, you have a friend for life. The conversations that our children have about their foster families really is remarkable. It has brought me to tears on more than one occasion. The way that they see the people around them is heroic, right? We want to be careful that they don't put people on platforms and pedestals that they don't belong on, but we had a young girl that unfortunately the foster parent chose to remove her from the home, and the devastation that this kid felt for the next month. So proud of her, though. She ended up coming into Breaking the Chains and coming into our Safe House program because she had just turned 18. But the devastation, I mean, we were around the clock watching her. But she didn't go back. But it was this tie that she had to this foster parent that was just beyond anything that we were even seeing with her biological parents. Ultimately, we were able to reunite the two and bring them back together, and it was like the moment that foster parent walked into the room at Breaking the Chains, I'm sorry, a light turned on in that kid. It was like, it reminded me of like a 5-year-old. She ran back to the Safe House to get all the stuff that she had been working on and all the things that she could do, and all she could do was tell her, look what I've done. I'm getting good grades. I'm going to summer school. I'm doing everything I said I would do. And it's just been incredible. And where she's at today and continues to sail off and climb is absolutely extraordinary. These are unbreakable bonds. So my hope today and some of the stuff that we're talking about is that you will consider where you're at on this path. Our Csec families still do take other placements because obviously it's not, there's a lot of opportunity for other kids, but it's also an opportunity for you to have a conversation within your foster care system, within your different foster care agencies, to have that conversation, or maybe even to reach out to us and say, look, I'd like to be considered. You can give me a call and see if I have placement available if you guys have a kid. Extraordinarily, we're able to walk beside you in addition to the foster care agency and provide extra parental support, guidance. Again, we make a commitment like we did to this family that if a child needs to be removed, then we show up along with the social workers to do an immediate removal in a way that is trauma-informed and it's not just them, having to be swept off. You asked me before I came, so I'm sorry if it's a little last minute, about prevention. Where are we at? Yeah, what time? Okay. About prevention. So I don't know if I should you want me to just throw it to questions? And
What do we do a couple of things that parents should be looking out for in their social media?
Yeah, definitely. So bark. Have you guys heard of bark? I cannot stress this enough. I tell all parents, it doesn't matter what spectrum your child is on the level of vulnerability, is bark. Bark is probably one of the greatest apps that you can put on every device that you have. We offer the opportunity to train you through bark. We actually have a consultant who you can connect with who will walk you through how that app works. But this app actually gives you the opportunity to not just track all of their movement on any type of electronic device, but it picks up keywords. We even use it for our child. So we get, especially during school time, probably about 3 bark alerts a day for our 13-year-old. And this is because somebody at school can use some sort of slang term, and it can be something like, for example, she was having a conversation in a group chat, and someone said, "Oh my gosh, you're killing me, girl." I got an immediate exclamation, "Somebody's getting killed. Check on this now," right? They'll say sick with it, and then all of a sudden you'll get a bark alert that says your child might be ill. Check on him. Obviously, you're able to review the messages and be like, "Oh no, they're just using slang, I guess." So it's really, really incredible. So that's really great because I'd rather have 3 false alarms than 1 actual alarm. At the same time, because she is 13, we've been able to catch some things. This is the same thing we're seeing with our Csec kids and our prevention kids. So we are really pushing bark. That is probably the most important thing I can leave you with tonight, is make sure you familiarize yourself with the bark app. Other things that you guys are going to want to look at, you already have in your tool bag. You're going to want to look at all the same red flags that I'm sure you've been taught. Things like isolation, right? That's always huge. When a child becomes withdrawn, or there's some sort of sudden change in behavior, this is a red flag that could be indicative that something else is happening. For us, looking at money that either comes up missing or is all of a sudden present. New items are huge. We think that we would see that, but it's more surprising than you would think how many different parents come to us after the fact of Csec, and they start talking about little things that they didn't pick up on, like new makeup, right? It was a new mascara. A lot of times we're seeing Csec kids, girls like to get their nails done, especially in what they call the life, but most kids can't just go out if they're in any type of supervised environment and just get their nails done, so they're getting the press-on nails and putting those on. All of a sudden, you're going to see more provocative behavior, provocative style behaviors, a change in friendship patterns. So I know a lot of this sounds common, but that's why I tell everybody all the time is you have those skills. We also are very much proponents for checking on kids. We're not trying to turn everybody to sergeants, but to check on them in the middle of the night. When we do our operations and also when we're talking to our kids that have come in later, there usually was a period of time for months, if not longer, where they were leaving in the middle of the night. Keeping an eye on medications within the home. There was actually a breaking story, but this is more common than what you think, about 6 months ago on ABC 30. Maybe it's been about 8 months ago, where the little girl was drugging the parents here in Fresno, putting them to sleep and then sneaking out. But that's actually something that is more common than you would think, right? So keeping an eye on that with like NyQuil and things like that. Also looking at that from within themselves. Sometimes we don't think about cough syrups and some of those things, because a lot of times when they're starting to experiment with any type of other substances, this is a gateway to obviously some of these illicit behaviors. So yeah, I think that's some of their normal red flags. Any questions? So and by the way, just FYI, I was expecting Whitney to be here. So if I seem I am not like this discombobulated, usually there's a back and forth. So there was a whole plan for tonight that like went out the window. So question.
Well, hang on. We're recording, so we want to make sure we capture all of the questions online as well. So I'm going to give you.
Oh, great. I'm happy you didn't tell me that ahead of time. My goodness.
I'll trade you. Here we go. So you can have that one.
First of all, I read your book in 3 days.
Wow.
It was really good.
Thank you.
And Penny Childers is a neighbor of mine.
Oh, today's
So
her
I said,
birthday.
hey, I saw your book.
Yeah, and today's her birthday, so.
Oh, okay, noted. So I have a 13-year-old who doesn't want any help. We've had her from birth. We thought we got a blank slate. Not. She brought all her birth mother with her. So how do you help someone who doesn't want it? Because it's really hard to hang in there when you're just giving. And
So I hope this isn't too long of an answer for you, but we're in this position ourselves, and I combat human trafficking, and I have a child being trafficked right now. My child. You read my book, okay? So I didn't stay out of the life. Again, right? Shameless plug. I ended up severely addicted to methamphetamine and other things. So ultimately, my daughter was exposed to that throughout my pregnancy and throughout the first 5 years of her life. And no matter what a great home that we've provided everything for her, my husband's a pastor, we've done everything. I teach other people how to do everything. By the time that she was 14 years old, we started to see the behaviors with her and her just fall apart. And so how do you help? That has become like the question. What I can tell you is just be the hands and feet of Christ. What God put in my heart, and it's almost like taking every degree I have and shoving it to the side, right? What God has done is use those degrees and those certifications to tell me you're doing the right thing, but now I need you to lean on me. What my dad did, and he had none of them, was be the hands and feet. Make sure that that child understands that no matter what, they're here. I think the worst thing that we can do, and I know this is hard when it's not our biological children, it's a little bit, different, but is to make sure they understand that although there's boundaries in place and there's rules that need to be followed, that I am always here for you. So one of the things for us, for example, with her is we continue to have our boundaries in place, but we continue to make sure that she understands there's always a safe place right here. In reading my book, you again understand that. It was that safe place that ultimately led me completely out. When the rest of the world had shut down around me, my father was still a place that I could go to, right? So, and then as far as at 13 is intervention. The average individual relapses into any type of bad behavior anytime from 2 to 24 times. That's huge, right? It's not something typically that and they could be 13 or they could be 30 that you're just going to bring to them and they're going to be like, oh, that makes sense. Okay, I'll do that now, right? So intervention. If you do have any concerns, and this part I did fail on, it is what it is. Some of this I didn't learn. At her age, she's 19 now. And when she was 12 and 13, I didn't understand the red flags like I do now, is you have the opportunity to still have counseling intervention. Even when you think they're not listening, they're listening. So what I would suggest is for you to partner with the Central Valley Justice Coalition. Specifically, my recommendation would be Arian Pauls. Arian, by the way, for all of you, if you're looking at prevention, is probably one of the most phenomenal prevention specialists that we have anywhere, and we have her here in Fresno. She's also a survivor, and she's someone that I trust emphatically. And so making sure that she has someone like that to connect with. I wish that when my daughter was younger that I would have had someone that was hip and cool who could have come in and really provide some of those intervention conversations and redirections that she needed. So, Central Valley Justice Coalition. We do prevention as well, but we only do it for DSS cases, so it's, the as referred through the DSS system. And truthfully, she's better than us. I mean, you got to give credit where credit's due. We're learning from her right now, so I'll send you to the best.
Any other questions? Okay, so I just wanted to thank you, Debra, so much for your wisdom and sharing with us. I want to leave you with a couple of things tonight. One is that I hope that you recognize in Debra's story that there is hope and there is recovery. I know a lot of our kids have probably come from a mom who was in the same position that Debra was in all that time ago, and how hard that is to have hope for some of our foster parents and have compassion for them. So I hope you've been able to maybe experience some of that tonight, hearing her story. And then the other thing is we recognize that this is a really big topic for a lot of our teens, and so we are praying and we're crossing our fingers. We have recently partnered with another organization, another church in Fowler that is getting a grant to do sex risk avoidance education. So basically teaching healthy relationship skills to young adults, teaching them these are what healthy relationships look like, so they can find some of those red flags for themselves without having to rely on us to, because they don't always want to listen to us when we tell them these are red flags, right? This is specifically geared for kids age 12 to 19, and so we're just moving forward right now, the grant is going to go through, and so as soon as we have that money, we are going to be establishing a class for these kids. It's 12 hours of education time, so we haven't quite decided how we're going to break up those hours, whether it'll be a couple of Saturdays in a row. Unfortunately, we can't do it on a night like tonight because we're out of building space, which is a good problem to have, but we will be offering this class as soon as that grant goes through. So we wanted to let you know that is our plan, to be able to provide that service for your families as well. Especially because we know one of the things that we have been lacking is we have great kids programs, but we are lacking some things as our kids are getting older, and so we want to make sure that we're providing things for them as well. And they get really great incentives. It's like if they invite a friend to come do the course and they both finish it together, they get like a $50 Amazon gift card or something. So we're not above, it's not bribery, incentivizing children to do the things we really want them to do that are good and healthy for them. So thank you guys so much for tonight. Before you leave, again, no Walmart, front door smash and grab over there, but take yourself something nice. And if you see something like, oh, I know my neighbor would really like that, feel free to take an extra one if there is something left at the end, because we do want to make sure that all of those items go. And then also grab yourselves a box of food on the way out. And Debra will be here for a little bit. We have time to hang out a little bit before we go get our kids. And so we can talk about these things around our tables and dialogue about this. All right, thank you guys so much for being here tonight. Yes? Oh, thank you. How many of you filled out that online survey to win the Nothing But Cakes gift card? There it is. All right, so we have our lovely wheel here. So we're going to go ahead and spin this wheel. And I hope the winner is here tonight, because otherwise that's really going to be anticlimactic to give it away to somebody who isn't here. Lena Arias. Hey! Thank you so much for filling. I don't think I filled it out. You filled it out twice. Thank you so much. Are these super fun? I love these. They're so great. So thank you guys so much for filling out all of that survey. It's really helped me kind of game plan for this next year about what our families really need. And so thank you so much for being willing to give us that feedback. So enjoy the rest of your evening. We've got a little bit of time before we can go pick up our kids, so feel free to enjoy and relax. Did I hear we have cookies somewhere? There is chocolate on your table. You can have that as well. I heard a rumor there were cookies, so if there are cookies, feel free to grab that. Last plug, so sorry. On the middle of your table is the Huntington Boulevard block sale that is happening on the 10th. So did anybody bring drop off for yard sale tonight? Yes. You have not dropped it off yet. You can still work with me to get that stuff picked up. We would like to have some people volunteering, especially to be out there and just sharing information about our group with the neighborhood and everybody who's down there. So enjoy that, and we will see you guys next month.